This is Sue Jackson of the Book by Book blog, and I am here today to wrap up my 2021 Big Book Summer Challenge. Now, many of you joined in with this challenge this summer, and I was thrilled to see how many participants we had. This is a challenge that I host every summer from my blog, Book by Book, and it's grown every year. This was the 9th year for the official challenge. I started doing it myself 10 years ago. And the idea is simply to use summer as a chance to read some of the bigger books that maybe you normally put off because of their size. So the concept is very simple. A big book is anything with 400 or more pages in any genre or type of book. It could be, whether you like to read romance or fantasy, science fiction, nonfiction, YA, graphic novels, anything counts as long as it's 400 or more pages. And you set your goals yourself. So many people just chose to read one big book over the summer and spent the whole summer, reading that book in between their other books. Other people like me like to choose a whole stack and then choose from those during the summer. So that's what I usually do. I go through my bookshelves in May. The challenge runs from the end of May to early September. I go through my shelves at the end of May. I pull out anything 400 or more pages that I've been wanting to read. And, I just set those aside and work my way through them during the summer. I don't get to all of them ever. I'll show you a photo of the stack that I made at the start of the summer. So those were my intentions. I ended up doing really well this summer. Besides the print books, I also include audiobooks. If the print edition is 400 or more pages, it also counts as a big book. And ebooks count as well. So in all, counting print books and audiobooks, I read 12 big books this summer. I forgot to check what I read last summer, but I think it was pretty close. The audiobooks really help to get through more books that way all the time, but especially during Big Book Summer. So I'm just going to give you a quick recap, very briefly, of the books that I read, what I liked, just so that you have an idea. Maybe you'll get some ideas for next year's Big Book Summer. So my first big book was End of Watch by Stephen King. Now this is the third and final book in the Mr. Mercedes trilogy, which begins with Mr. Mercedes, and then book 2 is Finders Keepers. This, as with the others, was excellent, as are all of Stephen King's books. Just really riveting, compelling. He's just a great writer. So I had a motive for reading this one first, and that is that my husband and I had started watching the Mr. Mercedes TV show, but we had only watched the first season, which is based on the first book. And I had heard correctly that the TV show switches things around so that the third book is covered in the second season, and the second book is covered in the third season. So before we could move on to season 2 of the show, I had to finish the whole series. So I did that at the beginning of the summer. We're in season 3 now of the Mr. Mercedes TV show. I have to say it varies a lot from the books, the second 2, which was a bit of a disappointment for me, as it always is for all readers. But the book was excellent. Really loved End of Watch by Stephen King. Okay. I'm going to go in the order that I read or listened to these. So next up was an audio book, The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna by Julia Grimes. So this is kind of an epic story covering generations of a family. It begins in Italy around the time of the First World War, And the focus is on this woman, Stella. So it begins when she's a little girl in Italy, growing up with her mother and her sister. Her father's away at war, and then once he comes back, he pretty quickly leaves for America. He's not a great father. He's absent a lot, and when he's around, he's often violent. And then the story eventually moves to America when the family moves there. It's an excellent, excellent book. It's very well written, in-depth characters. I found the historical settings just fascinating, both the parts in Italy and the parts in New York, or Connecticut, excuse me. They settle in Connecticut. The historical details were great. My one problem was it is a very dark book. There are some extremely disturbing scenes, and I don't know, it might have been worse listening on audio to the disturbing stuff. It's just unrelentingly dark. I can take dark if there's a thread of hope through it, or maybe if it ends on a bit of hope. That didn't happen here. So while I would say it is an excellent book, you should only read it if you're prepared and you're okay with a very dark story. So that was The 7 or 8 Deaths of Stella Fortuna by Julia Grames. Next up was one of my bigger books, The Lost Time Accidents by John Ray. Now this is one that had been on my shelf since last Christmas. I think my husband gave it to me. I had heard about it on a podcast that I used to listen to, The Readers. The host, Gavin, who recommended it no longer does the podcast. I'm not sure if the podcast is even around anymore. But he said it was all about playing with time travel, that sort of thing, which I love. So I jumped into it. It's an unusual book. It's a big book, and it's a little quirky. So it combines science and history and family drama. It's a whole lot of things combined. There's a lot of humor into it, which I love, woven into it, which I loved. There are times when I was just laughing out loud. But it's also a very intense book. It begins with this man who's recording his family history. He is stuck out of time, and so he's using his time to record his family history, which involves a string of men looking into the nature of time. So it begins back at the turn of the century in Vienna with his great-grandfather, his grandfather, and his great-uncle, who were all physicists. And it goes back and forth between the modern story and the history, the family history. It's very good. I really liked it. I thought it was very compelling, funny at times, but it is a little unusual. So just so you're aware. So that's The Lost Time Accidents by John Ray. Next up, I listened to another audiobook. This was a YA novel. All of This Is True by Ligia de Peñaflor. And I loved this book. It's a really unusual audiobook. It was a full cast audio, which I loved. And the book had been written all using reporting style. So the framework is somebody doing a TV interview. There are excerpts from journals. There are emails. There are excerpts from a novel that's a big part of the story. So there's a book within the book. And just the way it was done was excellent. So it's about this group of teens. They are really huge fans of this YA author who's written one book. And when she comes to their town for a book signing, they all go, they meet her, and to their shock, she invites them out afterwards for coffee. And they become friends with their favorite author. So this is like, every book lover's dream. But then her second novel comes out and it's entirely about them, very thinly disguised. And it reveals some secrets that some of them did not want revealed. So that's the basic concept, but the way this audiobook is done was just stunning. I loved it. I was just, glued to my iPod. I really enjoyed listening to it. So that's All of This Is True by Ligia de Peñaflor, a YA novel on audio. Next up was one of my favorite books of the summer, The Air You Breathe by Frances DuPont Peebles. This is a wonderful historical novel. It is set in Brazil, beginning in the 1930s, I think. Yeah. And it's about two young girls who become best friends, but they are from very different backgrounds. The story begins on a sugar plantation in Brazil, and one of the girls is the little miss of the plantation. Her father owns it. And the other is the lowest of the slaves. She is a kitchen servant. She's been orphaned, so even the other servants consider her like the lowest. She's an orphan and she's the youngest among them. But the pampered, spoiled little miss of the plantation, who's the same age, is looking for a playmate. And she sees the kitchen girl and she demands that she be allowed to play with her. So that's the beginning of a lifelong, very intense and at times difficult friendship between the two women. They both love music. They end up running off to Rio as teens and embarking on a music career. But those differences in their backgrounds really stay with them their whole lives. It was a wonderful book. Music is at the center of it. There are song lyrics throughout the book. I just wished that there was like a soundtrack to go with it so I could hear exactly the kind of music that they were listening to and making themselves. Wonderful, fascinating historical novel. That's The Air You Breathe by Frances DuPont Peebles. Next up was another audiobook, Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. This one was set in Australia. It centers on a teen boy, but it's really not a YA novel. It is an adult novel. This teenager has a tough time of it. He is living with his mother and stepfather and his brother. His brother is mute, doesn't speak. His mother and stepfather are dealing heroin out of the house and are addicted themselves. So life is really rough for this kid. The novel is all about, and things get a lot worse, believe me. So the novel is all about his life from about 13 to adulthood, how he tries to save his family. It's a very twisty novel. A lot happens with the drug trade in the local area. But his dream is to become a news reporter, and he follows that dream. So that's Boy Swallows Universe by Trent Dalton. I listened to it on audio, and I really enjoyed it. Next up in print was Blackout by Connie Willis. Probably my best big book of Big Book Summer 2021. I did love The Air You Breathe, but Connie Willis is a favorite of mine and of my husband's. She writes this series. This book is part of her series of Oxford time travel. And it's not a strict series. You don't have to read them in order, although this book is the exception, and I'll get to that in a minute. But all of her books are set in Oxford, roughly around 2060, when time travel has become not only possible, but fairly common. So the grad students in Oxford's history department study their subject in part by traveling back in time to observe that history firsthand. So there are other books, to say nothing of the dog, Doomsday Book, which is my all-time favorite. In that one of the historians went back to the 1300s. This book, Blackout, as you can probably tell from the cover, takes place entirely during World War II. So these modern-day historians are traveling back in time to World War II era England. And in this book, the time travel has really ramped up so that there are students and historians traveling all over the place, all at the same time, different times, different places. It's kind of overloading the system. So, for instance, the characters in this book, you've got a woman who is in rural England helping with the evacuation of children from London. There is another young woman who is posing as a shop girl in London at the beginning of the Blitz. So she is there to observe how ordinary citizens responded, during this extraordinary, lengthy series of events. So there's a lot of danger involved. So there is suspense in the novel from the danger that the characters are in when they travel back in time. Another character, Mike, has gone back to Dover to witness the evacuation of English soldiers from Dunkirk. And he's there, again, looking at ordinary citizens. His whole thesis is on ordinary people who become heroes. So he's there to observe the ordinary people who lent themselves and their boats to travel over to Dunkirk and bring soldiers back. So they're all somewhat in danger. Technically, with the time travel technology, they're not supposed to be in danger, but things begin to go wrong. They can't necessarily get back to their own time. So that's the basic premise here. But it is a big book. And unfortunately, I learned much too late, it is part 1 of 2. I said most of the series does not need to be read in order. This is the exception. The second book is called All Clear. I did just recently purchase it because I loved this book and I want to see what happens next. But this is a book 1 of book 2. So well worth your time, but just be aware it's a 2-book commitment. And I can't wait to find out what happens and how this is going to be resolved. So that's Blackout by Connie Willis. Gets my highest marks for my big book summer reading. I listened to another audiobook, big book, After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. This was a really intriguing novel. It was a post-apocalyptic novel set a little more than 100 years in the future, when not only have rising sea levels inundated the coastlines, but the water has covered pretty much the whole U.S., or the whole of North and South America, really. The heartland was flooded. The story begins in Kansas, and then the floods come. So the main character, she and her daughter are on their own after the floods. They're in a boat that her grandfather built for her, knowing that the floods were coming. The only real dry land left are the mountaintops, so there are some small villages and trading posts there. And she's trying to earn a living and support herself and her daughter through fishing, which her grandfather taught her to do. But just before the floods, her older daughter was kidnapped. So her younger daughter is now 7. Her older daughter would be almost 14. She has not heard a word about her older daughter in all this time. And at one trading post, for the first time ever, she picks up a clue as to her older daughter's whereabouts. So she sets out on a mission. This is a mother who has lost her child. She sets out on a mission with her younger daughter to try to find her older daughter. But the word that she got is that she's all the way up in the Arctic. So she hooks up with a larger ship that can maybe make it there. But, you know, as in most post-apocalyptic novels, the crisis does not bring out the best in people. There are a lot of pirates, raiders. You can't really trust everyone. So this book was very suspenseful. There's a lot of action in it, and family drama. I really enjoyed it. So that's After the Flood by Cassandra Montag. Next up came the biggest of my big books, Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. Now, I didn't start this until August. Yeah, a little procrastination there. It is the biggest. It's a little intimidating. My copy is actually only 600 pages, but they're very densely written and small print. So I think most versions are 800 to 900 pages. But I had never read any classic Russian literature in my life. I don't know why we didn't cover it in school, but we didn't. So I was very eager to read this. And several others joined me for a kind of a book buddy sort of read this summer. So, I mean, bottom line, it's kind of a Russian soap opera. It's titled Anna Karenina, and Anna is a major character in the book, but she's not the only major character. The story follows other characters' lives as well. Anna was actually not my favorite character. I really liked the storyline following Levin, and later Kitty. So, I mean, it's about politics and economics and agriculture and families and affairs. That's Anna has an affair, which is the main thread of her story. It was very good. It was more readable than I expected, which was a nice surprise. The chapters are short. The language was not archaic. It was easy to understand. The names I stumbled on a little bit. You know, most of the Russian characters have at least 3 names, often a nickname as well, and sometimes a title also. And they could be called like by their first and second name, or by their second and third name, or by their nickname. So there is a bit to keep track of there, but I really didn't have much trouble with it. And I enjoyed it. So it did take me a full month to read, but I enjoyed Anna Karenina by Leo Tolstoy. And I'm glad that I have finally read a classic Russian novel. While I was engrossed in Anna Karenina in print, I had time for 2 big book audiobooks. So the first one was The Accidental Further Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man by Jonas Jonasson. And this is, I've said this about a couple of other books, but this one is really quirky and unusual. So it turned out this is the sequel, and I did not read the first book, but that worked out okay. It was fine. So Alan is the 100-year-old man of the title, and at the beginning of this book, the second, he and his friend Julius are relaxing in Bali. Well, to celebrate Alan's 101st birthday, his friend Julius hires a hot air balloon. The two end up crash landing in the ocean, getting picked up by a North Korean ship that is carrying refined uranium, and they end up as guests of Kim Jong-un in North Korea. So that's just in the first chapters. Each chapter is labeled with a different country. They travel all over the world. They have these, I'm sure you can tell from that beginning, they have these outrageous adventures. But the book is very funny. I was often laughing out loud. One thing some people didn't like about it, but I enjoyed, there's a lot of political commentary in it because they are traveling around the world and because of the outrageousness of it. So Alan meets in person Kim Jong-un, Donald Trump, Andrea Merkel. She, he travels all over the world. He meets all these famous people. One thing that surprised me about this book is despite its like quirkiness and fun kind of character, I actually learned a lot because the narrative includes a lot of information about world history, global events, current events. So that was kind of fascinating. So it was both interesting and also very entertaining. I laughed a lot. That was The Accidental Further Adventures of the 100-Year-Old Man by Jonasson. Sorry. Keep trying to get the name right. And finally, my last audiobook for Big Book Summer, which I actually finished the first week of September. So I counted this for both Big Book Summer and the RIP, Readers Imbibing Peril Challenge, that I do every fall. This one was A Better Man by Louise Penny. Lots of people know about Louise Penny. Lots of my friends are huge fans of her series of mysteries about Inspector Gamache. This was an unusual choice for me because I have not read the whole series. In fact, I've only read the first book before this, Still Life by Louise Penny. So I have not been following this series. This, I think, is book 17, so I missed a little bit in between, but that was not a problem. I was immediately immersed in this story. If you're not familiar with it, Inspector Gamache is with the Quebec police force. He and his character is the main character through the series. It also centers on a small town outside of Quebec called Three Pines, and the residents of that town are ongoing characters as well. So I had an introduction to all that in the first book. Here, the main thread of the story, well, it's kind of a dual thread. There is dramatic flooding about to occur in the Quebec area and throughout the region, like 100-year floods, drastic crisis, huge natural disaster. So the police are looking into that and trying to help with what's the best way to prevent the most damage. At the same time, they get a case about a missing woman. So in the midst of this natural disaster, with all hands on deck for that crisis, Gamache is also trying to investigate this case of this missing woman, to find her or to find out what happened to her. It was excellent, just a gripping mystery, lots of suspense, and lots of red herrings. It was one of those mysteries where I kept guessing and thinking that I knew who did it, and I was totally wrong, or, that I knew what happened. And, the author just kept surprising me. And at the end, the twists just keep coming. So that was excellent. That was A Better Man by Louise Penny, which I listened to on audio. And finally, I finished out Big Book Summer with a big book graphic novel, Dragon Hoops by Jean Luen Yang. I had heard a lot about this graphic novel, and I've been wanting to read it. It won the Prince Award for Young Adult Literature. However, I think it was very interesting and perfectly appropriate for adults as well. It is about, and as you can see from the shiny cover, I picked it up at the library. Even though I have piles of books, you saw that pile for Big Book Summer. I had plenty others to choose from, but our library just fully reopened for browsing. So my husband and I couldn't resist at the end of August going in there and each picking out a book. And when I saw this, I remembered that I'd been wanting to read it for a while. So it's, the author himself is a part of the story. The framework around this book is the author writing this book. So it's kind of meta in that way. He puts himself into the story, and it's about how he slowly but gradually comes to really get engrossed in the writing of this book. So the story itself, as you can probably tell from the cover, is about a basketball team. He's a high school teacher. This is it's about the championship, the winning basketball team at his high school, which has gone to the California championship many years. And the author himself says, admittedly, he's not much of a sports fan, not really all that into basketball. But at his school, this is like the thing that everyone is obsessed with. The students, the teachers, the parents, the alumni, everything is basketball at this school. So he becomes interested. So throughout the book, he interviews players, very in-depth interviews, and writes and draws about their backgrounds, their upbringing, what their lives are like. He does the same for the coaches. He goes to the games and recounts, the highlights of some of the big games. He talks about the challenges that this team has. He also even delves into the history of basketball and the history of women's basketball. So I, like the author, am not a big sports fan. Don't really watch basketball, not all that into it. But I loved this book. It's a really wonderful graphic novel. Oh, let me show you some of the pictures. So, like, there's some of his drawings from a game. This is like some of the background of one of the players. Let's see if there's one of the pages about history. So it's just really a fascinating book, very well done. The drawings really help to tell the story. So that was Dragon Hoops by Jean Lewin Yang. And now I want to read more from him because I know he's written other graphic novels. So that was my big book summer, and I'd love to hear about yours. I will link to my blog below to the challenge page. On that page, if you're interested, you can take a look at other people's big book summers. Lots of people are posting wrap-ups now. If you're on YouTube and you are participating in the challenge, you can either post a wrap-up video like this or just mention the challenge and what you read in one of your other videos and link to that on my challenge page. I thought it was a great big book summer, and I know a lot of other people really enjoyed it. So I hope that next year you will join the fun too.